Good morning, everyone. It's Friday, June 1st. I'm Stephanie Haney. This is your 3 News Now early update with the top headlines from WKYC.com and our WKYC app. It was quite the weekend around the country and here in Northeast Ohio, in all of Ohio, as people dealt with the ramifications of the death of George Floyd. There were many demonstrations across the country, many here in Northeast Ohio, that started out peacefully, ended up transitioning into violence and damage, property damage, and those kinds of things. So we'll talk about that. But before we do that, let's take a moment to remember how we got here and what is the impetus behind these demonstrations that took place. Last week, 1 week ago today, George Floyd was killed in Minneapolis, Minnesota, at the hands of a police officer named Derek Chauvin. Video shows Derek Chauvin kneeling on George Floyd's neck for a matter of minutes, for almost 9 minutes, as George Floyd can be heard on the video saying, "I can't breathe." And yet the officer does not remove his knee from his neck. And Derek Chauvin has since been arrested and charged with third-degree murder related to the death of George Floyd. That is one instance of the killing of a black man at the hands of police officers, the killing of a person of color at the hands of the police officers that people are talking about in terms of these demonstrations. Some of the other names just recently, within the past several months, Ahmaud Arbery, who was killed while out jogging by 2 individuals who were involved in law enforcement. Breonna Taylor, who was killed at home while a search warrant was being served as her boyfriend shot and fire was returned, and then she was shot and killed. And of course, Eric Garner, who his situation bears a striking similarity to what happened with George Floyd, who was telling police officers that he couldn't breathe, spawning people to create those t-shirts that say "I can't breathe." So these are just many of the instances of injustice against people of color that people are out rallying against. So let's keep that in mind as we talk about the things that happened this weekend. Saturday in Cleveland, a protest that started peacefully, an "I Can't Breathe" protest that was put on by Black Lives Matter Cleveland, started peacefully for about 90 minutes, and then it turned violent and property damage did ensue. 66 people total were arrested. That does include people who were arrested for violating curfew, which we'll get to in just a minute here. Some of the things that happened during the protest here in Cleveland: 3 police cars were set on fire. Many businesses were broken into, windows shattered, businesses were looted, those kinds of things. So as a result of that, a curfew was put in place. That curfew started at 7:45 p.m. at 8 p.m. on Saturday, but it was announced at 7:45 p.m. on Saturday. So very quickly that curfew went into effect, and that has now been extended to June 2nd, tomorrow at 8 p.m. The curfew has been continuously being extended. So that's the most up-to-date information. That curfew in downtown Cleveland in the Central Business District is extending until 8 p.m. on Tuesday now. And it's also been expanded to the Market District of Ohio City. So if you are downtown during the restricted hours, you will be arrested. That is the police order, unless you live downtown or you're a member of the media. There was some confusion yesterday between the police and Mayor Frank Jackson about whether media would have access to the restricted areas during curfew, but it has been assured now that media will have access. So Frank Jackson did say that the curfew applies to both vehicles and foot traffic here, and that will continue through Tuesday at 8 p.m. In response to the protest, many Clevelanders made their way out to help clean up over the weekend. 2 separate campaigns that got a lot of attention on Saturday night looking for volunteers used the hashtag Clean the Land. So volunteers did arrive in downtown on Sunday morning, coming together to clean up damage that was caused during and after the protest. And the city did thank those volunteers and asked that they not attempt to clean up any broken glass. So if you are still a part of any ongoing cleanup efforts, do avoid the broken glass. The city is asking that so that no one gets injured while they're trying to clean up from what's happening here. And also a word on the demonstration versus the people who took the step to vandalize property, to loot things. There might be an inclination for people to necessarily separate those things. It's not quite as simple as just separating the protesters from the people who took the action. There have been a lot of people talking on social media, a lot of mental health professionals talking about how sometimes these kind of reactions are trauma-based. A lot of people, the conversation online talking about how we can understand that it is a crime to loot, and also how people have felt repressed and they have felt oppressed and how their voice has not been heard. So really important now at this time that, yes, we do need to talk about the fact that these things happened that are illegal, but also important to keep the idea on the message that these demonstrations were started in order to seek justice for the death of George Floyd and the deaths of so many other people who were unjustifiably killed. Poor Cleveland, one business here in the greater Cleveland area, responded by saying this: "Property damage can be fixed, things can be replaced, lives cannot. While we don't encourage violence or destruction, we will not judge a response to pain, oppression, and injustice that we cannot begin to understand. Thank you for wanting to support us, but please put your money and energy into supporting and sharing causes for racial justice." So in posting that, Poor Cleveland also posted resources where people can donate if they want to help people who have been arrested who might not be able to make bail. Another resource that's available for donating for people who have been arrested and potentially may not be able to make bail is called the Bail Project, which does have a branch that operates in Cleveland. And that address, that web address, is bailproject.org. We'll also have a link to all these other resources if you are someone who is so inclined to donate to help these people. So here is a little bit about the Bail Project. So they run something called the National Revolving Bail Fund. And what that does is it provides free bail assistance to low-income individuals who are, as happens in our justice system here, legally presumed innocent and who a judge have deemed eligible for release before trial, but they have to pay bail to do that. So if these people can't afford to pay bail, that's where the Bail Project steps in and they put up that bail money in order to let those people be released from jail pending their next court appearances in those dates. So keep that in mind. In Shaker Heights, a principal wrote an emotional letter to the community. This was after graffiti was found on a school building in the Shaker Heights area. This was a letter from Principal Eric Julie talking about the exterior of the doors and the pillars at the high school being graffitied with anti-police and anti-president sentiments. The graffiti, in one instance, referred to America, taking out the C and spelling it with 3 Ks as a reference to the Ku Klux Klan, spelling it AMERIKKKA. So in response to that, the principal wrote an emotional letter discussing his thoughts not only about the death of Floyd, but other examples of racial injustice that have taken place recently. Julie wrote, "Over the last week, I watched a white woman attempting to weaponize the police in Central Park, not far from where I used to live and teach." He's referring to Amy Cooper, the woman who called the police on a black man who was bird watching in Central Park after that person asked her to put her dog on a leash. In the letter, Julie goes on to write, "I watched the video of George Floyd with a knee on his neck, pleading for his mother and crying out, 'I can't breathe.' And on Wednesday night, I received word that a second Cleveland student of mine was murdered since the pandemic began." Julie then ends that letter saying, "I'm ready to get back to the work of making our school safe for every teacher, staff member, student, and parent who is in our community. I hope you are ready to join me." The letter is several pages long, and it pleads with the community to come together at this time and acknowledge the deep racial injustices in this country. You can read that full letter on WKYC.com and on our WKYC app. We will have that link for you as well in the comments here. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can find that there. Because of the protests over the weekend, there's been a lot of conversation about concern over a possible surge in cases of the COVID-19 coronavirus. So if you took a look at some of the footage over the weekend, it wasn't just here in Cleveland. There were demonstrations in Akron, there were demonstrations in LORAIN, there were demonstrations in Columbus, in Cincinnati, in many other places. So many of those people, if you take a look at the footage, they were wearing masks, some were not. Health officials have said when you're at these protests, when you're at these demonstrations and people are shouting, that's a prime opportunity for those droplets that carry COVID-19 to be out in the air. And when you're shouting, they're projected a little bit further than when you're just speaking at a lower volume. So that's a concern that has been raised. So right now we'll take a look at where the cases stand from Friday in terms of those latest numbers that were reported on Sunday. So the total number of confirmed COVID-19 cases in Ohio right now is 35,513. That is 947 new cases from Friday. And the total number of deaths is now 2,155. So that's 24 new deaths from Friday. Now, these numbers collective over the last 2 days are seemingly down from what we saw last week when those numbers were higher day to day than these numbers over the past 2 days. New hospitalizations over the weekend also down. From Friday, there were 102 new hospitalizations, bringing that total number of hospitalizations now to 6,049. And new ICU admissions over the weekend was just 3, bringing that total to 1,556. Now, with today being June 1st, there are things that are now allowed to open that were previously not allowed to open officially. Some of the things that includes are catering centers and banquet halls, for one. Now, weddings were not restricted from happening. They were subject to those smaller guest list limitations, but now with the banquet halls and the catering centers able to reopen, there can be as many as 300 guests. Those guests are still expected to physically distance. Tables at these events must be 6 feet apart, and employees are required to wear a mask. Congregating is not permitted, so people won't be able to congregate at the bar. They won't be able to get together on a dance floor, but the event, as of right now, can still take place. Also, for people who have gone back to work and have been in need of childcare, people in need of childcare in general, daycare services are now allowed to reopen today. Here are some of those stipulations that are put in place by our Ohio Department of Health Director, Dr. Amy Acton. There will be reduced staff to child ratios. There will be a maximum number of people per room. Children will have to wash their hands at drop-off and pickup. They will also be encouraged to alter procedures to maintain as much physical distance as possible between the children, utilizing temperature checks. There will be no field trips and no large group activities allowed, but those daycare centers will be able to reopen as of today. Now, in Lorain, there was also a protest this weekend, and it ended a bit differently than it did here in Cleveland, in downtown Cleveland. And some people are attributing that to the preparedness factor. A lot of people criticizing the city for the level of preparedness for what happened in downtown Cleveland, saying that some of the violence, some of the destruction could have been prevented. In Lorain, there was a peaceful protest that maintained its peaceful status all the way through, and some people are attributing this to the fact that Lorain Police Chief James McCann wrote a letter to the community specifically asking for a peaceful demonstration. This, of course, in response to the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis a week ago. McCann condemned the actions of the officers involved in the death of Floyd and said that they should be subjected to the full force of the law. Here's a little bit more of what that letter said. The Lorain Police Department respects this time for our community to express their grief, anger, and frustration, but please remember, our grief and anger must not lead to further violence. The letter goes on to say, we look forward to standing with you protesting this and other injustices, and at the same time serving and protecting our community by ensuring your right to peacefully protest. So the protest did go on Sunday. It was scheduled to begin at 3 p.m. It ended peacefully, and several officers even reportedly joined in that demonstration. So a little ray of hope there that there was a peaceful demonstration in Lorain. Again, that worked for that community, that police chief coming out, those police officers joining in with that community and standing with them against racial injustice. We'll have more for you here at 2 p.m. That's it for your early update with 3 News Now. I'll be back at 2 p.m. as soon as we get those updated numbers in from the Ohio Department of Health and more information on what's topping our headlines on WKYC.com and in our WKYC app. I'm Stephanie Haney.